Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is where we take sources you send us and, well, we really dig into them.
We do, and today we've got a really interesting piece of history. It's excerpts from Breeding and Care of Pit Bull Terriers in 1910.
Yeah, originally from a 1910 book called Fighting Pit Bull and Bull Terrier.
And we need to be super clear up front.
Absolutely, this is 1910 stuff over a century ago.
Right. We're looking at this purely for historical and educational reasons, to understand how they thought about animal care back then.
We are definitely not promoting or endorsing dogfighting, just exploring the text.
Exactly. So our mission here is really just to understand that turn-of-the-century approach. What were they thinking about breeding, about care, specifically for Pit Bull Terriers back then?
And, what maybe still resonates today or what's totally different.
It's fascinating stuff. You might be surprised by some of the perspectives from that long ago.
Okay, let's dive in. First up is puppy development. And right off the bat, it seems they knew that puppies aren't all the same.
Yeah, it's kind of striking, isn't it? Even in 1910, the text says, not all puppies thrive on the same food or treatment. That feels pretty observant for the time.
It really does. They mention feeding 4 times a day, adjusting exercise based on the pup's constitution, they call it. But here's something that jumped out at me, the warning about a young dog's confidence.
Ah, yes. If it gets badly beaten by an older dog in one of these tests.
They actually noted that could have a lasting negative impact.
And that's quite insightful, recognizing that a bad early experience could, psychologically affect the dog long-term. Confidence issues, basically.
Okay, moving on to selecting breeding dogs. They really hammer home the point about needing a good female.
Oh, absolutely. The source is very clear. A top-quality female is essential if you want first-class dogs. It's not just about the male.
Right. And then for the stud dog, the criteria are pretty specific.
Yep. Good family line has to be able to hold his own and even punish, as the text puts it.
And there's this idea of correcting the female's flaws while keeping her good point.
Exactly. They give examples, like if the female is lightheaded, whatever that quite meant.
You pair her with a heavy-muzzled dog.
Right. Or a long-legged, sort of lighter-boned female gets matched with a sturdy, muscular male.
It's like they were trying to balance things out physically.
It really looks like it. A kind of practical, if maybe not scientific, approach to genetics, trying to get the best traits from both parents and compensate for weaknesses.
But the number one thing, the quality they stress above all else.
Courage and fighting ability.
Yeah. And not just to the individual dogs, but seeing it consistently, generation after generation. They wanted it reliably passed down.
That definitely tells you a lot about the priorities of breeders working within that specific 1910 context. It was central to their selection process.
Okay, let's shift gears to care during heat and pregnancy. They advise separating the dogs right after mating.
And keeping them apart for another week or 2.
Why do you think that was?
Well, probably to make sure the mating took, and to avoid any other accidental encounters.
Makes sense. And they also mentioned the female shouldn't be overweight.
Right. They believed being overweight could hurt the litter size and the quality of the puppies.
And they talk about noticing the pregnancy around week 5, with her belly getting bigger until week 9. Seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah, those are the visible signs, though obviously today we have much more definite ways to confirm pregnancy.
So preparing for the actual birth, the whelping, they start by describing the heat cycle. Usually starts around 9 months old.
Typically, yeah. And happens about twice a year, lasting roughly 3 weeks. Though they do note it can vary.
And the signs. Some excitement, then physical changes.
Right. The swelling, the discharge changing from mucus to blood. And they pinpoint the time after the blood appears as when she's usually ready to mate.
What's interesting is they suggest letting the female choose the time.
Which kind of suggests they understood, maybe intuitively, when she was most fertile, even without the modern science. Letting her decide could boost the chances of success.
And again, total separation from all other dogs during this time, except the chosen stud.
Absolutely crucial for controlled breeding. No oops litters.
Then they give the gestation period, about 63 days, give or take a day.
Standard for dogs, yeah.
And where she gives birth. They say she often likes familiar places, but sometimes wants a change.
It points to giving her a safe, comfy spot, but also being aware her instincts might lead her somewhere else you didn't expect.
But then, they also say some breeders didn't bother with special preparations for the whelping area at all.
Yeah, that sounds a bit risky, doesn't it? Sort of hands-off.
But the guide quickly follows up saying, no, there are things that are absolutely necessary.
Right. And those are space and cleanliness.
Crucial. Enough room so she doesn't accidentally hurt the newborns.
Mm-hmm.
Basic safety.
Definitely. And the meticulous cleanliness part is interesting, too. They mention preventing worms and blood poisoning.
Shows a grasp of basic hygiene, doesn't it? Even back then.
It does. And they had practical ideas like these raised platforms for easy cleaning.
And using clean, dry straw for bedding, because you can just toss it out.
It's a pretty sensible system for trying to keep things sanitary, especially with vulnerable newborns around.
Okay, so during the pregnancy itself, they say, let her exercise freely.
Mm-hmm. And increase her food. Lots of meat, both raw and cooked.
And feed her more often as the due date gets closer. Like 2 or 3 meals instead of 1.
Yeah, it aligns with her needing more calories and nutrients for the developing pups and for herself. They even suggest adding milk and whipped raw eggs.
More protein, more calcium, I guess.
Seems like it, boosting the nutritional value.
Then there's this odd bit about castor oil the day before whelping.
Ah, yes, the castor oil. To empty the bowels.
But they admit it's probably not needed and might even cause diarrhea in the puppies.
Right. It feels like an old tradition they were maybe starting to question. Like, maybe just let nature take its course.
So how do you know birth is imminent? The guide lists signs like nervousness, trembling.
Looking sort of down, wanting to be alone, messing with the bedding, scratching, tearing.
And they reckon when you see that, you've probably got about 24 hours.
Those are pretty classic signs. The nesting instinct, wanting privacy and safety, it's natural.
And they wisely advise against bothering her too much. Only step in if you can actually help.
Good advice. Interfering can just stress her out. Oh, and they mentioned putting the puppies in a warm basket sometimes.
Especially with big litters, right?
Right.
So she doesn't step on them.
Exactly. They're so fragile. And keep water and milk nearby for the mom.
And keep the kennel warm, 80 degrees Fahrenheit, they say.
Crucial. Newborn pups get cold so easily. And the mother needs fluids for milk production.
They also liked early spring births.
Yeah, so the puppies could get outside sooner, get some sunlight. They thought it helped them grow strong.
Maybe a vitamin D thing, even if they didn't call it that.
Quite possibly. Just an observation that sunlight and fresh air seemed beneficial.
And getting those pups nursing ASAP is called paramount.
Absolutely vital. That first milk, the colostrum, is packed with antibodies. It's their first immune system boost.
Okay, now, litter size. They say 6 to 8 is ideal for the mother to handle.
Mm-hmm.
But if there are more, the advice is pretty stark.
It is. Find a foster mom or, well, dispose of the extras. They even suggest waiting a day or two to pick out the weakest ones.
Wow. That's definitely a product of its time. Hard to read now.
Very much so. It reflects a different reality, different values, maybe different resource constraints. Culling was a practice used back then, however difficult we find it today. The idea was to help the remaining pups survive.
They do suggest being ready with artificial feeding, just in case.
Right. If the mother's milk isn't enough, or if you need to supplement, they had a recipe. Cow's milk with a bit of lime water.
Lime water? Why that?
Probably to make the cow's milk easier for the puppies to digest. It's different from dog's milk.
And they fed them with a spoon or a special bottle?
Yeah, a bottle with a sponge in the nipple, apparently. And the feeding schedule was intense.
Every hour and a half in the first week.
Then every 2 hours, then every 3. It shows just how much work raising orphan pups is.
And finally, just keeping those separated pups warm, warm, warm.
In a basket, lined, slightly covered, away from drafts, absolutely essential for those first few weeks.
So let's wrap this up. Looking back at this 1910 guide, what are the big takeaways?
Well, definitely a huge focus on selective breeding for very specific things. Courage, fighting ability, physical type.
And really detailed care for the pregnant female and the newborn. Some surprisingly observant points mixed in there.
Right, like noticing individual puppy needs or the psychological impact of early experiences, that stands out.
But then you have practices like the culling, which are, jarring from today's perspective.
It really highlights the context, doesn't it? The priorities and maybe the limitations they were working with back then.
It makes you think how much has changed in over a century of animal husbandry. It's massive.
It really is. But maybe, just maybe, there are some underlying principles like the importance of careful selection or providing good nutrition in a safe environment that still hold true, even if how we do it is totally different.
Yeah, it's a fascinating look back. It forces you to consider the history, the values driving these practices.
And to appreciate how our understanding has evolved while still acknowledging the knowledge people had back then, working with what they knew.
Definitely. If you want to explore more about the history of this breed, that website mentioned in the source, APBT INFO.com, seems like a good place to start.
For sure. Lots of historical info there.
Okay, that's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.